This was one of my most exciting but also very tedious and long processes that I have done, but I am going to try to make Hoshigaki, which is this Japanese dried persimmon, so let's get started. For this process, I went ahead and grabbed Hachiya persimmons, which are the ones that are very astringent until they're absolutely ripe. They work perfect for this process because they do get sweeter as they dry. So the first step is to go ahead and peel these. I went ahead and started with the green tips at the top. I just used some scissors to chop them off. And once I had removed all of the green leaves, I went in with the peeler to remove as much of the orange as I could from the larger parts, and I peeled away all of the larger bits, and then I tried to use the peeler as well as a knife to get around the remaining green bits, getting as much of the peel as possible. After everything was peeled and ready to go, I had to figure out a way to hang the persimmons. I did find a few resources that said they used these little hooks and just screwed them into the persimmon, which I was really skeptical about because I was like, wouldn't it just be going into squishy flesh and then just fall out? But surprisingly, after screwing them in, it actually worked so well. That being said, there was a huge learning curve. I found out you can't stab it into the stem that easily, so stabbing it on the side of the stem or in softer parts of it works the best. However, with just some persistence and a lot of elbow grease, I managed to start to get it in, and it took about 2 minutes per persimmon, but eventually it managed to work, and it was surprisingly strong. Although I did not trust it, and I tested every single one very thoroughly because the thought of a squishy, juicy persimmon falling and splattering everywhere just was not something I wanted to deal with. But with every hook installed, I then went ahead and went in with the macrame yarn to just tie them in groups of 2. That way I could easily hang them and use each one as a counterweight. I did make sure to double knot because, again, the thought of a persimmon splattering everywhere, yeah, no thank you. And now to explain why I chose to do 4 persimmons instead of just 2, since those would have made a pair, and that's because I wanted to do 2 experiments. I wanted to do 2 of them as a traditional experiment to just hang and air dry, and then the other 2 I wanted to toss into the dehydrator because I did see that it was a good idea, especially in higher humidity areas, which is what I have. But after tying 2 of them together, I did test out whether it'd work, and it did. And then for the dehydrator ones, I wasn't just going to tie them together, I was just going to attach them to the dehydrator tray. That way they'd be secure when I went to toss them into the dehydrator. To do that, I just threaded the yarn through the tray before I tied it onto the persimmon, and I just tied it similar to the previous ones. There was nothing really special about the knots either, just the one that they teach you in first grade. Again, I was skeptical that this was going to work, but thankfully after testing it, it worked, so we're now off to the next step. One thing that my research led me to was finding out that these are very susceptible to mold. I mean, they are fruit hanging to dry, but one thing to do is to just disinfect them in boiling water for a couple of seconds and to just make sure that you coat them enough that they're disinfected, but not long enough to cook them. So I went ahead and disinfected them right now, but then later I realized that they probably bump into things and everything while I assemble them, so I'll disinfect them again later. Now, starting off the traditional drying process, I needed to hang them so that they could air dry, and I thought my curtain rod up here would be the perfect spot because I'd be able to keep an eye on them and they would be far and above anything else. Now, genius little me did things out of order. I should have hung the persimmon after I wrapped the string on the curtain rod and also disinfected them after I had hung them because I was trying my best to avoid touching everything and I ended up touching everything anyways, so having done them in that order would have made this a lot easier. However, I learned from my mistakes and I did end up just moving it away from anything, so no plants, no people, no nothing were touching these, and then I did go back in and disinfect them, and I just felt like this was the weirdest thing ever, which is why I am laughing so hard. But after I disinfected them for a couple of seconds, it is time for the next day. Day 2 of this persimmon journey. You can see that top one is a lot darker than the one on the bottom. That one was the riper one, and it's just turning a lot more translucent faster, whereas the second one still has the white from, I'm guessing, what's making it astringent or unripe. I'm sure if I were to press on it or to touch them, the top one would be softer than the bottom one as well. The other thing I want to note is they are no longer dripping. They're actually matte now, and yesterday they were dripping onto my plants. Thankfully, they are no longer dripping. They're just chilling now. They're dry. The hooks have held up. The string is held up. This contraption was actually great. The other thing I have to point out, because it was a fear of mine, was fruit flies. I found one fruit fly. Where is it? right there. That is the first one. I'm a little concerned because it's like literally only day. I am now a fly swatter, but I will keep you updated. I'll be back for day 2. Gotta check in on them. They're the first thing I think of. But this is day 3. They are very orange. The top one, actually, they're orange, but they're starting to turn brown. You can see they've got like those like speckles. If I can get the camera to focus, they've got those speckles on them now, which is really interesting. I don't know why. I also think they're pretty dry, and so I'm gonna touch the butt. Oh, why does it feel like that? That feels like I'm squishing my leg. This feels flesh-like. Ew, 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 ew. I'm gonna wait a week to massage them. But yeah, that is day 3. It is day 4. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I think it's day 4, but this is what they are looking like. You can see they are turning a lot darker. They've got spots are spotting for sure. And they're also starting to like brown a little bit more, where they're starting to get more translucent, where I think they're just getting more squishy, because you can see this one is the underripe one. It doesn't have as many of those spots as this one does. They're also, the texture, I can't explain the texture that they are. You can see when I squish it, I know I said I was gonna wait a week to massage them, but I don't know if my climate is just a lot more dry, but like massaging them right now is actually working, and like, yeah, I don't know, it is such a weird texture. Like this one's definitely a lot more squishy, but yes, that is day 4. There are no flies, thankfully, so I'll be back for the next day soon. It's a sad update for my persimmons. It is in fact too humid. Look it, they kind of look normal. Oh wait, no, you can see it. Ooh. Dun, da, 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 mold. Oh, and a fly. Did I catch it? No. Where'd it go? There it is. Yeah. No. Where'd it go? I actually have to get the fly now. But look at how bad that is. Ooh. So yeah, clearly this failed miserably, whether it's because I kept touching them a little too early or because of the humidity. Regardless, I needed to take these down and start over. That is such a bad idea. And of course I chose the foolish way, but eventually I took it off with the hooks. I went ahead and removed them, and here is how bad that mold got, and just some close-ups of the progress we got, but I'm not giving up, so let's go to the dehydrator method. So for the dehydrator method, it was going to be a unique one because I hadn't really seen instructions about how to do it online, but I went ahead and tested if the persimmons would actually fit, and once I found that they did, I went ahead and disinfected them again. And then for the drying process, I decided to do some experimenting, and I decided to go with 131 degrees Fahrenheit and then dehydrate them for as long as they needed. I was a little naive and started with 5 hours, you know, just casually condensing a multi-week process into just 5 hours, but after 1 hour had passed and they looked pretty much the same, I knew that wasn't gonna happen. Also, I decided to try to dry the persimmon skins to see if A, they would still be astringent, and B, if they would be a good snack. After an hour, they were pretty much the same. Nothing really had happened. However, they did have a skin. So I went ahead and started to massage them, since again, the dehydrator process kind of speeds up the process, and I didn't want to squeeze them too late. Also, similar to the previous experiment, I had one that was riper than the other. So the one here, the back one, is less ripe, so you can see it is still pretty much not translucent, whereas the one that I did just squeeze is a lot darker and is starting to get more translucent, and that's because it's more ripe. Here they are another 2 hours in, and again, looking pretty much the same. I did go in and squeeze them every time I checked in. That way they did get more ripe and more squishy on the inside so that they would dehydrate properly. And here is me realizing it needed a lot more time, so I gave it 8 more hours, but I didn't want the dehydrator running at night, you know, just in case, just being a little bit cautious. So after it had run, I did just let them sit in there without the machine running overnight, and they got very humid in there, and they just started this like coat of water on them. But After I dehydrated them again, the coating disappeared. I think I dehydrated them in the dehydrator for about 3 days, like 3 days during the day and not at night, just because I was very cautious about running basically an oven at night. But here are just the clips of me going in every couple of hours and just squishing them and hoping that one day they would finally dry up. But this just kept going and going and going, and honestly it was not that fun compared to the ones that hung on the ceiling because they weren't as squishy. I'll be honest, the texture is very different. They're a lot more tough. That being said, finally made it to the day where they were done, or at least as done as I'd like them. So I went ahead and took them out of the dehydrator, and you can see they are very shriveled up, but now I am going to take them over and do the next step. First thing, I wanted to address the persimmon peels. Honestly, they're not astringent, however, they're very crunchy and I just was not a fan of them. They're not like dried fruit, but they are like basically apple peels dried. Anyways, I did want to go in and process the fruits. The next step is to put them in a jar, in an airtight jar, and then put them in the fridge for about a week to just help with the sugar bloom, which is the white coating on the outside that looks like mold but is actually just sugar. I did want to show the persimmons. The one on the left is the one that is not as ripe. You could see it was a lot more brown, and they both are very tough. But I went ahead and added them into the jar and let them sit for a week, and this is what they were looking like after that. The next step after they sat for a week was to roll them out into their traditional shape that again will help with the sugar bloom. I will say, out of the refrigerator, they didn't really have much going on besides the fact that they were cold and they were kind of a little humid. Also, with being refrigerated, I feel like they were a lot more stiff, and I just remember them being tough already, and they got even more tough in the refrigerator. But I went ahead and rolled them out into their flat shape. They technically are rolled into basically a pancake. They're like a persimmon pancake. I honestly don't know the science behind rolling them out in the refrigeration and how it helps with the sugar bloom, but I did see it on a few blogs, so I was like, you know what, I am going to trust the experts. Once I had rolled them out, I relabeled them and they are off to the fridge. I was not willing to accept defeat on the traditional method, so I went ahead and grabbed even more persimmons and started with peeling them all over again, doing the same method as before, peeling all of the orange skin and getting rid of as much of the green leaves as possible. Now, this set of 3 persimmons were interesting. Not only did I find little babies inside one of them, but they were ginormous, and I was really worried that the hooks were not going to work for these because they just weighed so much more than the previous ones. But I went ahead and went in with the same method as before, just screwing them into the persimmons, and the first one failed. And I was like, this is going to be a disaster, but I was like, you know what, let me just try again, and thankfully it worked. I don't know if maybe I just stabbed it in the wrong spot or whatnot, but I went ahead and did it for all 3 of them. Now, you're probably wondering, why do you have 3? Why are you not doing them in pairs of 2? And that's because I wanted to experiment. 2 of these are going to be done the traditional method of hanging, but the third one I wanted to do a little bit in the dehydrator and then move it over to the hanging method and see if A, it impacted the texture, and B, if it would help with the situation of humidity and mold. So let's start off with the dehydrator one, and then we'll join it with the other ones later. Now, you kind of know the drill. I went ahead and added it into the dehydrator and then disinfected it using boiling water, just letting it sit in there for about 10 seconds. And then after that, I just dehydrated it for some time at 131 degrees Fahrenheit again. Since I only just wanted to basically dry out the original skin, I did only do it for some time until it started to dry. You can see here it looks dry and crusty, and then after that I went ahead and took it off the drying rack, dropped it, and then just proceeded to pretend I didn't drop it, grabbed it and reattached it to the string so that I could attach it to the contraption that I make for the other 2 persimmons. I've already gone through a lot of trial and error for this process, and I'm just going to go through some more of it for this one. I decided I wanted to just add the persimmons on top of my dehumidifier because it pushes out air and keeps the air around it dry. So I thought this would be the perfect method. And then after I hung everything up, I realized this was not going to work. Yes, they're spinning, but that's because of the string, and it has nothing to do with the air that is coming out of the dehumidifier. It is actually not pushing out as much air that the research said that this would need. And while it does keep the air around it dry. I didn't want to risk these guys failing again, so I went ahead and moved over to my house dehumidifier because I knew that it would be a lot stronger and it pushes out a lot more air. And coincidentally, right on top of it, it has this little opening that I could perfectly hang the persimmons from. Now, we can all agree this was the most creative of creative DIYs and the most creative way to do this, but honestly, I would argue that this was meant to be. Like, it was perfectly placed and it was super easy to set up. I then went ahead and disinfected these persimmons and let them do their thing. So remember that persimmon that I put in the dehydrator just to create a skin coating? Yeah, it's rejoining the family now. It went off for college and now it's back. So I went ahead and reattached its hook and then attached it to the two right here. My hopes is that if the other two do get moldy, that this third one will have its drier outer coating already and is less likely to get moldy, but I went ahead and let them sit, and again, I'm going to check in on them every single day. I didn't decide to do little cute vlogs, but I will go through everything that is happening. As you can see, the lines from the yarn are definitely making indents, and I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but you can also see that all of them have already got a peel and it's only been one day. A day later, and the skin has definitely gotten a lot thicker and they are drying very quickly, which is a good thing, but it's also making me wonder if the air current is just a little too strong because this peel isn't supposed to form for another week. Okay, at this point they are very shriveled and I'm like, if I don't start to massage them, they are definitely not going to do well. I'm also going to start to just let the dehumidifier take breaks, that way they have time to rest. I also want to point out that the one in the dehydrator is definitely drying at a much faster rate, but it's also a lot more tough like the ones that I made earlier. And the two that I am doing the traditional method for are definitely squishy, but they're not as squishy as the ones from before that did get moldy. So about 2 weeks passed doing this process, but I didn't want to film every single day just because a lot of the days looked like the days before and after them. But here is what they're starting to look like when they start to get translucent and a lot more squishy. And then you'll see that they're starting to shrink and shrink as they dry. And this was the state that I really enjoyed them at because they're still squishy on the inside, but they've got the like dried layer on the outside. And I thought that they would make the perfect texture here. The blogs said that the texture preference was totally up to every user, and I just wanted them to be ooey gooey on the inside. And since I was happy with where they were at, I went ahead and removed them from the contraption and then also had to do a sniff test, and honestly they didn't smell like much, but I went ahead and gave them one more squish, and then I was going to put them in a jar and put them in the refrigerator so they had their 1 week of refrigeration. Okay, you're probably like, what? Why are we taste testing already? Don't you have to roll them out? Well, these ones right here were the ones that I did in the dehydrator a while back that I did roll. You can see that they didn't actually sugar bloom. However, the ones that I just tossed into the refrigerator for a week, I was planning on rolling them out in this clip, but turns out they sugar bloomed on their own, so I didn't have to roll them. I'm not sure why this happened, but honestly, I'll take it because I could not wait another week to taste test. Of the three, you can clearly see which ones were a lot more squishy, aka the ones that I did the complete traditional method with. You can see they just look a lot more ooey gooey, but starting off with the dehydrator ones, I wanted to taste test them, and you can see with that knife cutting, it was a lot tougher and more like a jerky or like something a lot more dry. You can see that the inside is not as ooey gooey. It's kind of just fruit leather. Honestly, this one was fruit leathery and the taste was not there. I feel like the dehydrator just got rid of all of the persimmon-y taste. I went ahead and taste tested the astringent one or the less ripe one, and again, although it looked a lot cooler on the inside, it just does not have the persimmon flavor at all. I'm not sure why it kept the flower shape, but I thought it was really cool. But then moving on to the dehydrator one that I dehydrated and then hung up the traditional method, again, it kept the little flower shape, but you can see that the outside peel is there and then the inside is not that ooey gooey. However, it was phenomenal, and I could not get over how the sugar bloom was super sweet, but the inside was just like a mild persimmon-y taste. Now moving on to the ones that were the complete traditional method, these were magical. I don't know how this works or the science behind it, but look at how ooey gooey the inside was. It was creamy, it was delectable, it tasted like persimmon, and the outside was super sweet, and it had this like little leathery texture on the outside. It was so good. I was obsessed. I mean, they were so good that I ate them within the first day. I have to make more if I want more because they were so good. And now it is my personal mission to get my hands on some of the actual authentic Japanese ones, because if this is what my American persimmons DIY'd in my basement can taste like, I know that those will be so decadent and so good. I just need to try them. Honestly, this was such a fun DIY and it taught me a lot of patience, and if I were to do this again, I would 100% go with the traditional method, ditch the dehydrator. It took away too much flavor and didn't really create the sugar bloom that just gives it that extra kick of sweetness. Honestly, I am 100% gonna do this again. I've gone through all of the troubles of figuring out what does best, and now it's just a simple process of patience. So I am off to enjoy the rest of these, even though I just told you I finished them all. But past me is gonna enjoy all of them, and future me is gonna make a ton more.